Leander Tillman arrived at his office before anyone else the way he had every morning for 31 years. The elevator opened onto the 14th floor of the Hargrove and Associates building at 6:47 in the morning, and Leander walked to his corner office without turning on the hall lights. He knew the path by feel. He set his coffee on the desk, sat down, and looked at the photograph. It was the only personal item on the surface, a 5x7 frame slightly off-center from where his assistant always moved it back. Leander and Mortimer Hargrove in 1994, standing in front of a commercial foundation on the east side of Savannah. Both of them young, both of them grinning the specific grin of men who had just done something no one believed they could do. Mortimer had his hard hat pushed back on his head at an angle that suggested he had forgotten it was there. Leander had his hands in his pockets. They were looking at the camera but thinking about the building behind them. Leander looked at that photograph every morning. He had looked at it through good quarters and bad ones, through 2 recessions and 1 federal audit. And the year the Southeast construction market collapsed and they had to let 11 people go in a single afternoon. He had looked at it on the morning Mortimer called him from the hospital the first time, and on the morning Mortimer called him the last time. This morning he looked at it longer than usual. He knew Minerva was going to that wedding alone. He had known for weeks. He had offered twice to arrange for someone to accompany her, and she had declined both times in the polite and final way Minerva Hargrove declined things she had already decided about. Leander had not pushed. He understood that Minerva's quiet was not weakness. It never had been. What he did not know, what he could not calculate from his 14th floor office, while the rest of Savannah was still asleep, was the precise degree to which the Northcott family was unprepared for who Minerva Hargrove actually was. He had a sense of it. 6 months earlier, he had discovered that Henrietta Northcott had hired a private investigator to look into Minerva's finances. He had told Minerva immediately. She had listened without interrupting, and then she had said 4 words, "Do not tell Caldwell." Leander had asked why. Minerva had thought for a moment the way she thought before she said something she had considered from every angle, and then she had said, "I want to see what the girl does when she doesn't know what comes with him. I want to give her a real chance." Leander had honored that. He had not told Caldwell. He had filed the information in the part of his mind where he kept things that were not resolved, only suspended, and he had gone back to work. Now it was the morning of the wedding, and the photograph of him and Mortimer was looking back at him from the desk. And Leander was doing the only calculation that mattered. How unprepared was Henrietta Northcott exactly? And how would that unpreparedness reveal itself? He did not yet know the answer. But he was not, as it turned out, going to have to wait very long. Minerva Hargrove woke at 5 in the morning, the same way she had woken every morning for 33 years. Not because of an alarm, because 33 years of early mornings had wired her body in a way she had stopped trying to reverse somewhere around the time Caldwell started walking. She lay still for a moment in the quiet of her bedroom, looking up at the ceiling of the row house on Pinehurst Lane in the historic district of Savannah that she and Mortimer had bought together in 1989 for $52,000, when the neighborhood was nothing, and they were less than nothing, and the only things they had were each other and a plan so ambitious it bordered on delusion. She remembered the morning they signed the papers. Mortimer had put his hand on her shoulder in the parking lot of the title office and said, "Minnie, one day, this whole street is going to know our name." She had laughed, kissed his cheek, and said, "Baby, I don't need the street to know our name. I just need us to know our worth." He had looked at her the way he sometimes looked at her, like she had just said the most important thing he had ever heard. That was 35 years ago. She got up slowly, the way she had learned to get up in the years since her right hip started making its opinions known at dawn. She moved to the closet and stood in front of it for a moment before reaching to the right side to the item she had decided on 3 days ago and had not second-guessed since. The navy dress. She had worn it once before. To Mortimer's funeral 4 years ago on a gray November morning when the whole city of Savannah turned out, and she had stood at the front of a church that held 600 people and not cried once. Not because she wasn't broken. She was broken in ways she was still mapping. But Mortimer had told her in the last weeks in the hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and the particular silence of machines doing work that hearts were supposed to do. "Minnie, when I'm gone, don't let them see you fall apart. Fall apart at home. In public you stand." She had stood. She was standing now. Someone might have wondered why she chose this dress today. Why not something new, something celebratory, something that didn't carry the weight of a November funeral? The answer was something Minerva had not said out loud to anyone and did not plan to. The navy dress was the garment she had worn on the worst morning of her life and still walked upright in. It was the proof hanging in her closet that she had already survived the thing that should have leveled her. She wanted to carry that today, not as mourning, as armor. She moved to the ironing board in the kitchen and pressed the dress with the slow, careful hands she used for everything. The same hands that had pressed 3 decades of school clothes and interview shirts, and once, memorably, a curtain that Mortimer had tried to iron himself and produce something that looked like a topographic map. On the counter behind her, 2 photographs. Mortimer in his hard hat and dusty work boots, standing in front of a half-built commercial foundation in 1992, grinning like a man who had just conquered something that had previously considered itself unconquerable. And Caldwell at his architecture school graduation, shaking hands with his dean, tears tracking down the left side of his face that he was clearly trying and failing to keep back. Minerva touched the second photograph briefly with 2 fingers, the way she touched it most mornings, then went back to ironing. On the kitchen table sat the gift, small, rectangular, wrapped in brown leather and tied with a thin cord. Inside was a journal, the kind with thick cream pages and a spine that gave a satisfying crack when you opened it for the first time. Minerva had started writing in it the day Caldwell was born, July 14th, 33 years ago. The first entry read, Day 1. You don't know what you're worth yet, but I do, and I will spend every day making sure the world catches up. She had written in it on his first day of school, holding the pen in the kitchen, while he was still asleep upstairs, the house so quiet she could hear the refrigerator. She had written on the day he got his driver's license, and on the day he called her from college, crying because a professor had told him his design concepts were too ambitious for someone with his background. She had written 7 pages that night. She had mailed him 3 of them. There were 114 pages total. She had counted them 2 nights ago, sitting at this same table reading them from start to finish for the first time in years. It took her 3 hours. By the end, she was not crying so much as simply full, the way you feel after a long meal with people you love. She had wrapped the journal back in its leather, tied the cord twice, and set it by the door. 1 page she had not sent him. The last one, Shamovhan. She had written it 3 months before the wedding on the morning of his 33rd birthday, sitting at this table in the early light before he called. She had folded it separately from the others and kept it between the journal's back cover and the leather wrapping. She was waiting for the right day to give it to him. She had believed when she wrote it that today might be that day. She still believed that. What she could not have predicted was exactly how that belief would be tested first. Mortimer Hargrove had started with 1 construction crew in the spring of 1988. 1 truck, 4 men, 2 contracts, a small commercial renovation on the east side of Savannah, and a parking structure for a medical office that paid $34,000 total. He reinvested every dollar, hired 2 more crews by the end of year 1, and operated on a philosophy he had described to Leander Tillman at the time as simple: do the work better than anyone expects, and then do more of it. By 1996, Hargrove and Associates had its first 7-figure contract. By 2004, it was the largest Black-owned commercial real estate development firm in the Southeast. By the time Mortimer died, the portfolio held 41 properties across Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee, managed through the Hargrove Family Trust with a total valuation that had not been made public since 2019 and had grown considerably since. Mortimer had explained the trust's structure to Leander once in the small 3rd-floor office they had shared in the early years in 2019, 3 months before the diagnosis became the prognosis. He had said, I want her protected from people who will try to use information to control her. So I'm building it so that nobody can find what's inside unless they know exactly where to look and exactly how. The trust held. The trust was in the language Minerva never used out loud, invisible. Minerva was the majority stakeholder, had been since the day Mortimer restructured everything 3 months before he passed. She did not talk about it, did not post about it, did not wear it. She drove a 2015 Honda Civic with 97,000 miles on it and a crack in the passenger side mirror. She kept meaning to get fixed, not because she couldn't afford to, but because Mortimer had once said the best car is the one that gets you where you need to go, and the Civic got her where she needed to go. This was, she understood, a choice. Not poverty and not carelessness. A choice rooted in something Mortimer had hammered into Caldwell. From the time the boy was old enough to listen, let people show you who they are before they know what you have. Because once they know what you have, you'll never know who they really are. Caldwell had honored that. He had told Cordelia Northcott the surface his mother was a widow from Savannah. His father had worked in construction. His family was close. He had not mentioned the trust. He had not mentioned the 41 properties. He had not mentioned that one of those properties was Thornfield Estate, acquired by Hargrove and Associates in a quiet transaction in the spring of 2020 for $4.4 million. The same estate where at this particular moment, Cordelia Northcott's $395,000 wedding was being assembled by 44 people with tulips that had been flown in from Amsterdam. Minerva knew this, of course. She had known it since the acquisition. She had signed the paperwork herself. She had simply never mentioned it to Caldwell or to anyone else because it was a business asset and her business assets were her business. Henrietta Northcott had the instincts of someone who had spent 30 years managing social environments, the way architects manage load-bearing walls with constant, invisible, unacknowledged effort. She was 58 years old, silver blonde hair set in the kind of style that required a standing appointment, a champagne-colored dress that matched the event almost too precisely. Pearls, always pearls. She had the look of a woman who had been comfortable for so long that the discomfort of others had ceased to read as anything other than a personal inconvenience directed specifically at her. 6 months before the wedding, Henrietta had hired a private investigator out of Atlanta. She had paid $5,000 for a comprehensive financial picture of Minerva Hargrove because Henrietta Northcott did not enter situations without knowing the landscape, and the landscape in this case was the mother of her daughter's fiancé. She wanted to know, as she had put it to her attorney, what she was actually dealing with. The report came back 3 weeks later, a row house on Pinehurst Lane in the historic district of Savannah, a 2015 Honda Civic with high mileage, a personal savings account, Minerva maintained for day-to-day expenses, and a life insurance payout from Mortimer's policy. Total estimated assets approximately $2.1 million. The investigator noted the deceased husband had worked in commercial construction and built a modest regional business before his death. The investigator had found nothing held through the trust. He had found nothing because he had not known to look through the trust. He had not known because Henrietta had not known to tell him to look there. And Henrietta had not known to tell him because she had not known the trust existed. Minerva Hargrove had spent 4 years being precisely as invisible as Mortimer had taught her to be. Henrietta Northcott had done her research. She had simply done it on the wrong woman. On the morning of the wedding, Henrietta called Arabella Park into the small coordinator's office off the main corridor of Thornfield Estate. Arabella had worked 43 events at this venue in 6 years. She was organized, professional, and had never been asked to do what she was about to be asked to do. Henrietta handed her a note card. On it was a brief description: a black woman arriving alone, older modest clothes, possibly a modest car. If this person appeared, Arabella was to call Henrietta immediately before allowing entry. Arabella stood with the note card in her hand. She looked at it for 3 seconds. In 43 events, she had never been handed a note card like this one. She did not say anything. She was not sure there was anything to say that would change anything. She clipped her clipboard under her arm, put the note card in her jacket pocket, and walked back to the event floor. That was the first choice made that day. It would not be the last. Minerva pulled through the iron gates of Thornfield Estate at 3:50 in the afternoon. She parked in the third row of the guest lot in the space nearest the exit because she had always parked near exits, a habit from decades of arriving at events where she was not entirely certain she would be welcome and wanted to know the distance between herself and the door. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror once, straightened the collar of the navy dress, picked up the leather-wrapped journal from the passenger seat and held it with both hands for a moment before stepping out. The estate was beautiful in the late September light. Thornfield had been built in 1887 as a private residence for a textile merchant who believed that wealth should be expressed architecturally in ways that prevented any ambiguity about its existence. The stone facade had weathered into the kind of dignified gray that money could not manufacture, only wait for. The grounds were immaculate. The iron gates were original. Caldwell, the first time he had seen it, had stood in the drive and been quiet for almost a full minute before saying anything, which was how Minerva knew he loved it. She did not think about the acquisition papers she had signed 4 years earlier. She thought about Caldwell. The stone steps leading to the main entrance were wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast, lined on either side with white hydrangeas and iron planters. Arabella Park stood at the top with her clipboard. A valet in a black vest stood near the door. Minerva began to climb. She had taken 4 steps upward when Henrietta Northcott appeared at the top. Not by coincidence. Henrietta had been positioned there for the better part of an hour, standing slightly to the right of the entrance, champagne glass in her left hand, the posture of a woman who had made a decision in advance and was simply waiting for the moment to execute it. She had been watching the third row of the parking lot. She had been waiting for the Civic. Minerva continued climbing. She was not reading the posture or performing an assessment or preparing a response. She was simply walking toward the door of a building she had been invited into carrying a gift for her son. She reached the 6th step. She was perhaps 15 feet away when Henrietta stepped forward and stopped her. The words came out clearly, loudly, with the practiced delivery of something that had been sitting in Henrietta's chest since that afternoon and was now finally being permitted out. Why is there a black woman I've never seen before walking into my daughter's wedding uninvited? Someone call security now. The valet near the door turned and found something very interesting to study on the far horizon. Arabella Park looked at her clipboard. A couple ascending the steps behind Minerva stopped mid-step, exchanged a glance, and then looked carefully away. No one said anything. 300 people preparing for a wedding in all that building, a dozen within earshot, and not one of them found a word. Minerva took one more step upward. Her voice came out even and unhurried. I'm Minerva Hargrove, Caldwell's mother. I was invited. Henrietta tilted her head. The smile appeared thin and patient, the kind of smile that meant the opposite of warmth. Sweetheart, I don't know what Caldwell told you, but this is a Northcott event. She looked Minerva up and down a second time, slower than the first. And you are not what we had in mind. Minerva looked at the faces around her, the averted eyes, the turned backs, the sudden intense interest in champagne glasses and flower arrangements. She held each face for just a moment, the way you hold something you are committing to memory. Then she looked at Arabella Park, who was looking at her clipboard with the fixed concentration of someone trying to become invisible through force of will. Pastor Aldridge Odom was standing at the edge of the top step with a glass of water. He was 65 years old, senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Savannah's historic district, and he had delivered the eulogy at Mortimer Hargrove's funeral 4 years earlier. He had spoken for 31 minutes from memory without notes, and there had not been a dry eye in the 600-seat sanctuary. He knew Minerva Hargrove. He knew who she was, not in the sense of the trust or the portfolio, but in the fundamental sense that mattered. He knew what she had carried and how she had carried it. His mouth opened. Then it closed. He looked around at the other faces on the steps. He looked at Arabella Park and her clipboard. He looked at the couple who had stepped around Minerva and continued up without a word. And then he looked down at the ground at the stone step in front of his shoes and stayed there. That was the moment he would carry for a long time afterward. Not what happened next. What he did not do. 2 security guards appeared from the entrance doors. They were not aggressive. They were simply present and purposeful, taking their positions on either side of Minerva with the practiced ease of men who had been briefed in advance. Keandra Pittman was standing on the terrace to the left, 20 feet away. She was 22 years old, Caldwell's cousin on his father's side, the only member of his family who had been placed in the wedding party. She had been holding a glass of sparkling water and watching from the moment Henrietta stepped forward. Her hand was on her phone. She was not thinking about consequences. Keandra Pittman had never been particularly good at thinking about consequences before she acted, and in the years since she had been the kind of 9-year-old who walked straight into situations that made adults freeze. She had come to understand this about herself and make a certain peace with it. She saw something wrong. She moved toward it. This had been true her entire life, and it was true now. Her thumb was already typing before she had consciously decided to type. 2 messages, one to Caldwell, one to a number she had stored in her phone 2 years earlier when Caldwell had asked her to keep it, saying just in case. The name in her contacts was Leander Tillman. The message was 4 words, sent in under 90 seconds from the moment Henrietta opened her mouth. Minerva looked at the 2 guards, then at Henrietta, then one final time at the faces on the steps around her, holding each one for just a moment. Then she looked back at Henrietta. You should know what you're doing. Henrietta's smile did not waver. I know exactly what I'm doing. Minerva nodded once, a small contained nod, the kind that means noted, and she turned. She walked back down the steps with her gift pressed to her chest and her spine absolutely straight. Her shoes were low-heeled and sensible, and they made a soft, steady sound on each stone step going down. No rushing, no stumbling, every step deliberate. At the bottom, she walked to the third row of the parking lot, opened the driver's side door of the Civic, and sat down with her feet still outside on the gravel. She did not cry. She did not shake. She breathed slowly, deeply, the way a person breathes when they are choosing with great deliberateness not to become what someone else wants them to become in this moment. She had been here before. Not this driveway, not these steps, but this moment. Many times in many rooms by many people who had looked at her and made the same decision Henrietta Northcott had just made. She had outlasted every single one of them. What she held in her lap was the journal. 114 pages. 33 years of a life recorded in her own hand, every entry written with the belief that what she was building mattered, and that Caldwell would need to know about it, not just the business and the properties and the trust, but the part of it that could not be held in a portfolio. The part that was just his mother sitting at a kitchen table in the early morning, believing in him before the world knew his name. The last page was still folded between the back cover and the leather wrapping, still undelivered. She had thought today would be the day. She was not sitting in this parking lot in the September afternoon light, entirely sure anymore. Inside Thornfield Estate, on the second floor in the Groom suite, Caldwell Hargrove was adjusting a boutonniere in front of a full-length mirror, entirely unaware that his mother was sitting 40 yards away, holding 33 years of the most important things anyone had ever thought about him. And on the 14th floor of the Hargrove and Associates building across the city, Leander Tillman had just picked up his phone and read a forward message from a 22-year-old who had been smart enough to store his number 2 years in advance. He set the phone down, stood up, took his jacket from the hook behind his door, walked out without turning off his computer screen. His assistant looked up. "Thornfield," he said. She started to say something about a 5 o'clock call. He was already at the elevator. Keandra Pittman crossed the terrace in 12 seconds. She counted them later, not because it mattered, but because her mind worked that way in moments of urgency, cataloging details that other people's brains simply discarded. 12 seconds from the moment she finished typing to the moment she pushed through the side door into the estate's main corridor. She did not slow down for the couple coming the other direction. She did not slow down for the caterer with the tray. She moved with the particular velocity of someone who has decided that social friction is a problem for later. The Groom's suite was on the second floor end of the East Corridor. She had memorized the layout during the rehearsal walkthrough 2 days earlier because Keandra memorized layouts the way other people memorize faces. She took the stairs, 2 at a time, turned right, walked to the end. She did not knock. The room smelled like cedar and something expensive that Tavian Drummond had sprayed into the air approximately 20 minutes earlier and which had not entirely dissipated. There was a half-eaten cheese plate on the side table and soft music coming from someone's phone, something instrumental and low. The light was warm. It looked like the last peaceful moment before a man's life changed, which was in fact exactly what it was. Caldwell was standing in front of the full-length mirror with his jacket on and his boutonniere half-pinned Tavian behind him, adjusting the back of his collar with the focused attention of someone who understood that this was the kind of detail that mattered. They both looked at the door when it opened. Caldwell looked at Keandra in the mirror. "She's outside," Keandra said. The door hadn't fully closed behind her yet. "Your mom." In the parking lot, Henrietta Northcott had her removed from the front steps in front of everyone. Security walked her out. Tavian's hand stopped on the collar. Caldwell looked at Keandra's reflection. He did not turn around. He looked at her in the glass for 3 full seconds, and in those 3 seconds, something happened behind his eyes that Keandra had only seen once before at Mortimer's funeral, when Caldwell had stood at the gravesite after everyone else had stepped back and simply looked down at the ground for a long time without moving. It was the expression of someone absorbing an impact that their body had not yet decided how to register. Then he turned. "What did you just say?" It was not a question in the way questions are usually questions. It was the sound of someone pressing on a bruise to determine the full extent of the damage. Keandra told him everything. She told it the way she had seen it, fast and precise, with the editorial restraint she had trained herself toward over years of telling people things they did not want to hear. Henrietta at the top of the steps, The words she had used, exactly those words. The two security guards. The couple who had stepped around Minerva and continued upward. Arabella Park and her clipboard. She told him about the way Henrietta had looked at the Civic when she dismissed Minerva. She did not editorialize. The facts were doing sufficient work on their own. Caldwell listened without moving. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides in the particular stillness of someone working very hard at something internal, some private machinery that required all available concentration to operate without visible output. When Keandra finished, he did not say anything for a moment. Then he reached up and unpinned the boutonniere from his lapel. He held it briefly and then set it on the narrow shelf below the mirror, with a precision that was quiet and complete, the way you set something down when you are done with it and want that to be clear. He straightened his jacket once. Where is she now? Third row, still in the car. He nodded. He looked at Tavian. Tavian looked back at him and said nothing, because Tavian Drummond had known Caldwell Hargrove for 11 years and understood that there were moments when the most useful thing a person could do was stay out of the way of what was already in motion. Caldwell walked out of the suite. He found Cordelia at the end of the hall in the bridal suite. He knocked twice, a courtesy rather than a request, and opened the door. The room was full of the particular organized chaos that preceded weddings. Her maid of honor. Two bridesmaids, soft light from the windows, the dress on its stand in the corner, flowers on every available surface. Cordelia was standing in front of the floor-length mirror in the gown, and she was extraordinary in it. There was no other word. The dress was ivory and intricate, and had clearly been chosen by someone who understood that certain moments in life are worth the construction of a physical artifact, a thing that says, this mattered. She looked at Caldwell in the mirror and smiled, the warm, automatic smile of a bride seeing her groom too early. You're not supposed to be here, she said. It's bad luck. Did you know? 3 words. He said them quietly. No accusation in the tone, no theater. Just the question, clean and direct, standing in the room waiting to be answered. The smile stayed on Cordelia's face for approximately 2 more seconds. Then it did something else. Something shifted beneath it, a small recalibration, the expression of someone who had been hoping a specific conversation would arrive later, or preferably not at all. Her maid of honor went very still near the vanity. One of the bridesmaids found a reason to look at the window. Did you know your mother was going to have my mother removed? It was not a question the second time. Cordelia turned from the mirror to face him. She was composed, and that composure was the thing that hit hardest, not the fact of what she had done, but the steadiness with which she was prepared to account for it. Not panic, not shame. The composure of someone who had already made her peace with a decision and was now simply managing its reception. I was trying to protect today, she said. Her voice was measured, reasonable, the register she used in conversations she believed she could navigate. Your mother, Caldwell. I love you, but she was going to stand out. The way she dresses, the car she drives. My mother's entire network is here. The Fairfax partners are at table 4. My father's board members. These are people who— Stop. One word. Flat. You agreed to this, Caldwell said. He said it the way you say something when the saying of it is the final step in your own comprehension of it. Not anger, exactly. Conclusion. This was not my mother showing up somewhere she wasn't wanted. This was a plan. You and your mother planned to remove my mother from my wedding. Cordelia's chin lifted slightly. The composure held. I did it for us, Caldwell. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that one of the bridesmaids quietly gathered her things and slipped out the door. Long enough that the room became uncomfortable with the weight of what was not being said. I need some air, he said. He walked past her, down the hallway, down the main staircase, through the lobby, past the champagne tower, and the flower arrangements, and the 300 guests who were drinking and laughing, and entirely unaware out through the front doors into the afternoon light. Cordelia stood alone in the bridal suite. Her maid of honor had stepped out for hairpins. The remaining bridesmaid had followed the first one out a minute after Caldwell left. The room was quiet in a way it had not been all afternoon. She looked at herself in the mirror. The dress was extraordinary. The hair was extraordinary. Every element of this image had been assembled over months with the kind of meticulous attention that most people reserve for things they believed would define them. This was supposed to be the defining image, the one that lasted. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said to no one, very quietly, what did I do? It was not a question. It had the flat, arriving quality of something finally admitted, a thing that had been pressing against the door from the inside and had now simply come through. Cordelia Northcott was not a cruel person. She had not understood herself to be a cruel person when she had agreed 6 months earlier to her mother's plan. She had understood herself to be a practical one, a person who loved Caldwell and loved him enough to want their life together to begin cleanly without complications, without the friction of mismatched worlds and mismatched expectations. Her mother had framed it as protection. Cordelia had accepted that framing because it was easier than examining its cost. But Caldwell's face in this room 3 minutes ago had not allowed her the framing anymore. 3 words, no accusation, just the question, and she had watched herself fail it. She had watched her own composure hold where it should have broken, and she understood now that the composure itself was the evidence. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips and looked at the ring on her left hand. Her maid of honor appeared in the doorway with the hairpins. "You okay?" she asked. Cordelia looked at her own reflection one final time. "Ask me in an hour," she said. The third row of the parking lot was quiet. Caldwell sat in the passenger seat of the Civic with the door open, his feet on the gravel outside, and looked out through the windshield at the estate entrance. The afternoon sun was moving through the oak trees at the angle it moved at in late September, the quality of light that belongs specifically to that season in that part of Georgia, warm and slightly amber, and carrying in it the suggestion that something was ending. Minerva looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then she put her hand over his on the center console, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Baby," she said, "don't blow up your life over this." Caldwell looked straight ahead through the windshield. Mama. She knew. She agreed to it. Silence. "I know," Minerva said quietly. That was all. 2 words, and in them the complete weight of what she had understood for 6 months and had chosen to carry alone, waiting to see if the weight would ever need to be shared. She had hoped it wouldn't. She had never fully believed that hope. Caldwell's phone buzzed against his leg. He looked at the screen, a number he had not seen in 2 months, and above it a name. Leander Tillman. The message was 4 words, "I'm 5 minutes out." Before Caldwell could respond, a second message arrived. "I brought company." Caldwell stepped out of the Civic and walked 10 feet from the car before he called Leander back. He needed the distance not from Minerva, but from the part of himself that was already running calculations he did not want her to see forming on his face. There were decisions being made in the next few minutes that would extend well beyond this parking lot and this afternoon, and he needed to be certain he understood the full shape of them before he walked back to that car and said anything to his mother. Leander picked up on the first ring. "I heard what happened," Leander said. His voice was what it always was, low and unhurried, carrying the particular authority of a man who had spent 4 decades in rooms where the stakes were high and the noise was carefully controlled. "I'm on the highway, 12 minutes. "Who called you?" Caldwell asked. "Keandra sent me a message the moment it happened." Leander paused briefly. "Smart girl, your cousin." Caldwell exhaled. "Leander, you don't have to." "Caldwell." The way Leander said the name stopped the sentence before it finished. "Your father was my partner for 27 years. Your mother is the majority stakeholder of everything Mortimer and I built together. Someone put their hands on her today." He paused, and when he continued, there was something in the pause itself, a quality of certainty that Caldwell recognized from every serious conversation he had ever had with this man. "I'm not staying home for that." Caldwell pressed his free hand against the back of his neck and looked up at Thornfield Estate from the parking lot, the ivy-covered stone, the iron gates, the valets in their black vests moving between Porsches and Range Rovers, and somewhere in the third row, one politely overlooked Honda Civic. "You said you brought company." "The other 3 senior partners," Leander said. "Alonzo, Sybil, and Lionel. They were already in Savannah for the quarterly review when I called them. None of them needed to think about it." Caldwell understood immediately what that image would mean to anyone in that ballroom who knew the company's name. In a room full of commercial real estate money and infrastructure investors, several people would know the name. Several people at table 4 would know it very well. "There's something else," Leander said. His tone shifted, not darker exactly, but more careful. The register he used when he was about to hand someone information that would require them to reorganize what they thought they knew. "6 months ago, I flagged something to your mother about the Northcott family, about Henrietta specifically." Caldwell was very still. "Henrietta hired a private investigator last spring. She wanted to determine your mother's real financial standing before the wedding. She wanted to know what she was actually dealing with. The words arrived one at a time, each one settling before the next came. You knew about this 6 months ago, Caldwell said. Your mother knew too, Leander said. She asked me not to tell you. He paused, and when he continued, Caldwell could hear the slight weight of it, the way Leander carried things that had belonged to Mortimer. She said she wanted to see what Cordelia would do on her own, whether the girl could love you without needing to know what came with you. Caldwell turned and looked back at the Civic through the windshield. He could see Minerva in the driver's seat perfectly still, looking at nothing in particular with the expression she wore when she was privately bearing something very large and had decided that the bearing of it was her work alone. She wanted to give Cordelia a chance, Caldwell said. And Cordelia failed, Leander said, simply, completely. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. The investigator's report, he said. How far off was it? Leander made a sound that in another context might have been a short laugh. The investigator valued your mother's total assets at approximately $2.1 million based on what he could find in public records and personal accounts. He found nothing held through the trust. The trust is structured to be invisible to anyone who doesn't know exactly where and how to look, and Henrietta didn't know to tell him to look there. And she built her entire plan on that incomplete picture. She did. Charles paused. That's the thing about people who move on incomplete information, Caldwell. They always believe they have the complete picture. Caldwell turned back toward the estate. Through the lobby's tall windows, he could see the shapes of guests moving the chandelier, throwing its particular quality of warm light across the marble floor. He thought about his mother at the top of those steps, the journal in her hands, the navy dress she had worn to his father's funeral, the faces that had looked away. He thought about 33 years of 5 in the morning and a kitchen table and 114 pages. Leander, he said, yes, don't rush. He looked at the iron gates and the private drive beyond them, still empty, the oak trees on either side catching the late afternoon light. Drive the speed limit. Come in through the main gate and park where everyone can see you. Tell Alonzo, Sybil, and Lionel no rushing. You walk in like you have every right to be here. He paused. Because you do. Leander was quiet for 3 seconds. Then your father would have said exactly that. Caldwell ended the call. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking at the estate, looking at the gates, looking at the private drive. Then he walked back to the Civic and opened the passenger door and got in. Minerva looked at him. He looked at her. Something passed between them that did not require words, the particular understanding that exists between people who have been through real things together and have learned that language is sometimes the slower route. They're coming, he said. Minerva nodded once. She looked back through the windshield. At 4:47 in the afternoon, the first Rolls-Royce Phantom turned through the iron gates of Thornfield Estate. The first thing people noticed was not the car itself, but the quality of its arrival. There was no announcement in the sound, no performance in the approach. The Phantom rolled through the gates and came to a stop in the center of the main drive with the unhurried certainty of something that has never once needed to announce itself, and the silence it carried was a particular kind of silence. The silence of weight and intention, of something that had decided not to hurry and had the authority to make that decision. The second Phantom followed 30 seconds behind it, the third 30 seconds after that. They parked in a diagonal line near the estate entrance, not blocking anything, not performing anything, simply present in the way that certain facts are present before they are spoken and sometimes more clearly. The senior valet, a man named Gerald, who had worked the Thornfield lot for 11 years, and had parked every variety of serious vehicle that serious money could produce, stood with his radio raised halfway and did not speak. He recognized the model. He understood what the model indicated. He waited. Leander Tillman stepped out of the first car. He was 64 years old, 6 feet even, in a charcoal suit, with a faint window pane pattern that only revealed itself in direct light, the kind of suit that was not attempting to impress anyone and therefore impressed everyone. Silver at his temples, cufflinks that caught the afternoon sun once and did not repeat the performance. He adjusted his jacket with 2 unhurried pulls and looked at the estate entrance with the expression of a man who has been to a great many places and is simply arriving at one more. Alonzo Gatewood emerged from the second car, broad-shouldered, a deep burgundy tie against a dark suit, moving with the unhurried ease of someone who had conducted 9-figure negotiations in rooms smaller than Thornfield's foyer and had learned that urgency was a posture you adopted when you were not certain of the outcome. Sybil Okafor stepped out of the third car. 58 years old, silver-haired, the only woman in the group, and the person who had personally negotiated the acquisition of Thornfield Estate in 2020, who had sat across a table from the estate's previous owners and conducted 4 hours of conversation that ended with signatures on documents that transferred this property into the Hargrove Family Trust. Last was Lionel Ashford, 55, lean and precise, who said nothing as he buttoned his jacket and looked at the estate's stone facade with an expression that was technically neutral and somehow conveyed everything. 4 people, 4 cars, no hurry. The valets parted for them without being asked. Inside the estate, at precisely the moment Leander Tillman's foot crossed the threshold of the main entrance, Arabella Park received a message through her earpiece from the gate staff. She stopped walking in the middle of the corridor. She stood very still for 3 seconds. Then she turned to her assistant. "Go get Mrs. Northcott right now. Don't explain. Just get her." Henrietta was in the ballroom doing what Henrietta did best, moving through a room with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent decades ensuring that her presence in any space felt like a natural consequence of that space's existence. She was at table 4 with Ulysses Fairfax and his wife, laughing at something Ulysses had said, one hand resting lightly on the table, the warm and effortless performance of a hostess in complete command of her afternoon. Her assistant appeared at her elbow. Henrietta did not break the conversation. She tilted her head slightly, the signal that meant not now. Her assistant leaned closer and said 3 words. Henrietta's hand came off the table. She excused herself with the smile intact and walked to the corridor. Arabella Park was waiting near the lobby entrance. "What is it?" Henrietta said. Her voice was controlled. "4 guests have arrived. They're not on the list. 3 Rolls Royces, Mrs. Northcott. They came through the main gate. They're already inside." Henrietta processed this with the stillness of someone performing a rapid internal recalculation. "Names. I don't have names yet, but the lead gentleman, the gate staff, recognized him. They think it's Arabella," hesitated briefly. "Leander Tillman, ma'am." The name sat in the air between them. Henrietta repeated it the way you repeat a name when you are running it against everything you currently know. Leander Tillman, CFO of Hargrove and Associates. The Atlanta Business Chronicle cover last quarter. The Southeastern portfolio. She had seen the name in business publications. She had no personal relationship with it. She had no reason to associate it with today. "What is he doing here?" she said. Arabella had no answer. She offered none. Henrietta straightened and smoothed the front of her dress once with one hand. The gesture was small and automatic, and she was probably not aware she had made it. "Keep the ceremony on schedule," she said. 6:15 regardless. I'll handle it." She turned back toward the ballroom. Her posture was correct. Her expression was assembled. She had spent 30 years navigating social situations that required management, and she was very good at it. And she was walking back toward the room with every intention of demonstrating that competence now. She did not yet understand that the ground she was walking on had not been fully surveyed. In the ballroom, Ulysses Fairfax had set his champagne glass down with a small, precise click the moment Leander Tillman crossed the threshold. Ulysses Fairfax was 59 years old and had been in commercial real estate development in Georgia and the Carolinas for 30 years. He knew exactly who Leander Tillman was. He had submitted meeting requests to Hargrove and Associates twice in the past 18 months. Both times he had received polite and impenetrable responses that communicated absolutely nothing. He sat very still and watched Leander Tillman walk across the marble floor of Thornfield Estate and felt something he was not accustomed to feeling at social functions. Not unease exactly. Something closer to the sensation of realizing mid-conversation that you have been operating with a fundamental misunderstanding of who you are talking to. The whisper chain had already started at the edges of the room. Soft and fast-moving table to table with the particular velocity of information that people find both surprising and significant. "That's Leander Tillman from Hargrove and Associates. He was on the cover of the Atlanta Business Chronicle last quarter. The Southeastern portfolio. They hold a substantial share of Savannah's commercial district. What is he doing here?" No one had an answer yet. But Caldwell Hargrove was crossing the courtyard from the parking lot with his mother beside him, and the question was about to stop mattering. They walked up the stone steps together. The same steps, the same hydrangeas in the iron planters, the same width of stone wide enough for 6 people abreast. Minerva walked with her shoulders back and the journal pressed to her chest, and her low-heeled shoes making the same soft, deliberate sound on each step they had made on the way down an hour earlier. Not one person at the top of those steps moved to stop them, and inside through the tall lobby windows in the warm light of a chandelier that had been hanging in this exact position since 1988, 300 people were about to find out what they had been standing on. The lobby of Thornfield Estate went quiet before Leander Tillman said a word. It started the way these things always started, at the edges where people were paying less attention to their own conversations and more to the periphery. A man near the bar put his glass down. A woman in a yellow dress leaned toward her husband and said something behind her hand. A cluster of guests near the far wall looked, turned back, then turned again. The whisper chain had already been moving since the moment the three phantoms pulled through the gate, and now it reached the interior of the ballroom with the particular speed of information that people find both surprising and consequential. Henrietta appeared from the corridor entrance to the left of the lobby. She had composed herself during the 45-second walk from the hallway assembled. The smile straightened the posture and arrived looking like a woman who was simply greeting a late arrival. She extended her hand as she approached. "Mr. Tillman, what a wonderful surprise. I don't believe we've—" Leander looked at her hand. He did not take it. He stopped walking, stood where he was, and looked at Henrietta Northcott with an expression that carried no hostility and no warmth and no performance in any direction. It was simply clear. The expression of a man who had decided what this moment was going to be and was allowing it to be that. Henrietta's hand remained extended. 1 second, 2, 3. She lowered it. "I'm not here for introductions, Mrs. Northcott." Leander's voice was level and carried without effort, the way voices carry when a room has collectively, and without discussion, decided to be quiet. "I'm here because a member of my board was removed from this property this afternoon, and I think it's time this room understood who that was." He turned not toward the front entrance, but toward the side door to the left of the lobby, which opened at that precise moment because Caldwell had sent a text to Keandra 30 seconds earlier, and Keandra had been standing at that door waiting. Minerva Hargrove walked in. The same navy dress, the same leather-wrapped journal pressed to her chest, the same low-heeled shoes making the same soft, deliberate sound on the marble floor each step, placed with the unhurried certainty of someone who has decided before leaving the house that morning exactly who they are going to be regardless of what the day asks of them. Shoulders back, chin level, walking with the quality of movement that belongs to people who have spent decades being precisely themselves without apology or adjustment. The room, which had already gone quiet, went quieter. Ulysses Fairfax at table 4 did not move. He was watching with the focused stillness of a man processing a significant revision to his understanding of the afternoon's dynamics. Leander waited until Minerva stood beside him. Then he faced the room. "For those of you who don't know," he said, and clearly some important people in this room do not, "this is Minerva Hargrove, widow of Mortimer Hargrove, majority stakeholder and chairman of the Hargrove Family Trust, which holds, manages, and controls Hargrove and Associates, one of the largest commercial real estate development portfolios in the southeastern United States." He paused. Let the name settle. And he continued with no particular emphasis, which was precisely why the words hit harder than emphasis ever could. "This property, Thornfield Estate, acquired by Hargrove and Associates in April of 2020 for $4.4 million. At the back of the room, someone dropped a fork. It struck a plate, and the sound went everywhere into every corner of a room that had become so still that the small, sharp ring of silverware on porcelain was audible from 30 feet away. Ulysses Fairfax's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth and remained there. Cornelius Northcott, who had been standing near the corridor entrance with a glass of bourbon he had not touched in 20 minutes, sat down in the nearest chair. He did not look for the chair first. He simply sat, and the chair happened to be there. Henrietta did not move, did not speak. The color in her face went through several changes in rapid succession. A brief flush, then something considerably paler, then something that had no precise name but was perfectly legible to everyone who was watching her, which at this moment was most of the room. She understood what the document was the moment Leander set it on the table beside him. He placed it slowly face up and stepped back on, and she did not need to cross the 6 feet between them to read it. She understood it the way you understand a thing you have been dreading in some private part of yourself for longer than you have admitted, not because you predicted the specific form it would take, but because you always knew underneath all the planning and the management and the careful social architecture that the ground you were standing on had not been fully examined. She had hired the investigator. She had paid $5,000. The investigator had come back with a house, okay, a modest savings account, and a life insurance payout, and she had built her entire strategy on that foundation. She had been thorough. She had done the work. She had simply done it on the wrong woman. The document on the table was a single page printed cleanly on Hargrove and Associates letterhead in the precise, unambiguous language of people who have never needed to raise their voices because their paperwork does the necessary work for them. It was the lease agreement at 11 events over 4 years, every Northcott family function held at Thornfield Estate since 2021. The charity gala, 2 corporate dinners, Cornelius's retirement celebration, and the engagement party for Cordelia and Caldwell that Henrietta herself had organized 6 months earlier with such visible pride, every detail attended to, every guest carefully considered. All of it contracted through Thornfield Estate Management, a wholly owned subsidiary of Hargrove and Associates, which meant that every check Henrietta Northcott had written to this venue, every dollar she had spent performing her family's position and taste, and standing for the benefit of her social circle, had gone directly into Minerva Hargrove's trust. Ulysses Fairfax read the document from Table 4 without standing. He had enough experience with contracts to understand one at a glance. He read it once. He set his champagne glass down and did not pick it up again. Henrietta looked at the document from 6 feet away and did not approach it. Minerva stepped forward, not to the center of the room. One step past Leander enough to be clearly present, clearly herself, clearly undiminished by everything that had happened on those stone steps 2 hours ago. She looked at the room, all of it, every table, every face, every person who had watched her walk back down those steps and said nothing. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice she had used on the steps, even, unhurried. The voice of someone who had decided long before this afternoon what she was going to sound like when it mattered. "I didn't come here today to make a point," she said. "I came to watch my son get married, to bring him something I've been working on for 33 years. She looked down briefly at the journal in her hands. "I came to stand next to him at the beginning of something important and let him know the way parents do that he was loved, and that he came from something real." She looked up. Her eyes moved without theater to Henrietta. "I don't need this room to apologize to me. I've been in rooms like this before. I know what they cost and what they're worth." A pause. "But I do need one thing." She turned. Cordelia Northcott was standing at the edge of the ballroom entrance in her wedding dress. No one had seen her come down. She was barefoot, her heels gone somewhere on the staircase, her hands at her sides, and her eyes red, and her jaw set with the particular rigidity of someone working very hard not to come apart in the room full of people. She had heard everything from the doorway. She had been standing there long enough to hear all of it. Minerva looked at her directly, not with anger, not with the warmth of a forgiveness that had not yet been earned and would not be performed, but without cruelty. "I need you to be honest with my son," Minerva said. "Whatever comes next, whatever you both decide, it has to start from an honest place, or it won't hold." The room was so quiet that the candles were audible, the small, soft sound of flame consuming wax in real time. Caldwell stepped forward from where he had been standing near the entrance. He crossed the marble floor slowly, jacket buttoned, hands at his sides, and stopped in front of Cordelia. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. Her chin trembled once and steadied. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need the true answer. Not the managed answer. Not the answer that protects today." He held her eyes. "Did you know what your mother planned to do to mine?" Cordelia's lips parted. She held the silence for 3 seconds, for the kind of silence that is itself already the shape of the answer, that fills in the truth before the words arrive. "Yes," she said, almost a whisper. "I knew." Caldwell nodded slowly, the nod of someone who was already certain and for whom the confirmation is not a surprise but still carries weight, still costs something. He reached into his jacket pocket. He held the ring for a moment, the ring he had chosen 8 months earlier in a small jewelry shop on Jones Street, that he had carried for the past 6 hours against his chest. He thought about the man he had been when he chose it, certain and clear and full of something uncomplicated. He thought about what certainty actually required. He set the ring on the table beside Leander's document. The diamond caught the chandelier light once briefly and then was still. "I think we both know this isn't the right day," he said. The room emptied the way expensive rooms empty when something true has occurred in them. Not all at once, not with any dignity. In clusters and fragments, people peeling away in twos and threes, collecting jackets and clutches, and the particular expressions of those who have witnessed something they will be discussing for years but describing carefully depending on who is asking. Ulysses Fairfax left first. At the door, he paused and turned back and looked at Leander Tillman across the room and gave a small nod, the nod of a man who was updating his files. Leander received it without expression. Cornelius Northcott sat in his chair for 11 minutes without moving. A caterer eventually reached over to clear the untouched plate beside him, and Cornelius did not notice. Henrietta had moved to a corner near the corridor entrance, her back partially to the room, her phone in her hand. She was calling someone. Her posture had changed in a way that had nothing to do with intentional adjustment. Something structural had gone out of it. Keandra Pittman stood near the side entrance with her phone out. She had recorded everything from the moment Leander walked in, 17 minutes of footage. She had not posted it yet. She was waiting. She would know when. Pastor Aldridge Odom found Minerva before he left. He came to where she was standing near the center of the room with Caldwell and Leander, and he stopped in front of her. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said. She looked at him. "I was standing on those steps. I knew who you were, and I didn't say anything." The room around them was still emptying, voices and movement at the periphery. "I'm sorry," he said, simply, without qualification. Minerva looked at him for a moment. "Pastor Odom," she said, "I know you were there." A pause. "An apology is a beginning." He nodded and walked away. It was the entirety of the exchange. He would stand in his pulpit 4 weeks later and speak for 22 minutes about the architecture of social silence, the practiced collective decision that rooms full of people make when they choose not to intervene, without using names, without citing details, and every person in his congregation would know exactly what he was talking about. At 6:02 in the evening, Keandra posted the audio, not the full 17 minutes of footage. Just 22 seconds of audio recorded 40 minutes before Leander walked in, captured through a partially open door as Henrietta spoke to Cornelius in the hallway. Henrietta's voice clean and unambiguous and fully identifiable. "I know exactly what I'm doing. It was always going to come out eventually. Better now than at Christmas dinner." Keandra added no caption. She did not need one. By 9:30 that evening, the clip had 340,000 plays. By midnight, it was at 900,000 and trending on 3 platforms under the phrase "better now than Christmas dinner," which people had immediately adopted to describe any situation in which someone's deliberate cruelty had been exposed as premeditated rather than impulsive. By 7 the following morning, it had crossed 2.4 million. By noon, it was at 4.1 million. The comment section was a sustained collective recognition. Hundreds of thousands of people who had either experienced something like this personally or loved someone who had doing what people do when a story finally names something they have been carrying without language for it. They wrote about their own mothers. They wrote about rooms where no one had spoken up. They wrote about the specific weight of being looked through by people who had decided, without knowing anything real about you, exactly what you were worth. Henrietta's social media profiles went private on Sunday afternoon. On Monday morning, Sybil Okafor drafted a 4-sentence letter revoking Northcott Events' preferred vendor status at Thornfield Estate Management. Professional, unembellished, final. 3 active contracts between Northcott Development and Hargrove and Associates subsidiaries were placed under formal review. The letter cited standard compliance procedures and made no mention of Saturday. They did not need to. Cornelius Northcott called Leander at 8 on Monday morning. His voice, Leander told Caldwell later, was the voice of a man who had made a choice between his wife and his conscience, and had been genuinely surprised to discover that the conscience was still available to be chosen. He apologized clearly, directly, and without conditions or qualifications. Leander listened, accepted it, and relayed the message to Minerva word for word. Minerva said, "Tell him I appreciate that." Then she made her coffee and went to sit on the front porch on Pinehurst Lane in the early morning quiet and watch the neighborhood come awake, and did not think about the Northcott family for the rest of the day. 6 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in November, a routine federal contractor compliance review of Northcott Development's commercial zoning submissions found something that had been sitting in a state filing system for nearly 2 years, unexamined, waiting for exactly the kind of scrutiny that a viral recording and 3 revoked contracts had now made inevitable. 2 commercial development projects submitted between 2022 and 2023 contained environmental impact assessments that did not match the independent survey data on file. The discrepancies were not clerical errors. They were consistent, directional, and significant enough to have materially affected the approval timelines for both projects' approvals that had already been granted and under which construction had already begun. The formal inquiry opened on a Thursday. By Friday, it had been referred to the State Attorney General's office. The following week, it appeared in the business section of 2 Georgia newspapers with headlines that were careful and factual and nonetheless managed to contain both the words Northcott and falsified within the same sentence. Minerva heard about it from Leander on a Thursday morning. She listened to the full update, asked 2 questions, thanked him, and then said, "I want to make sure that whatever comes from this, the people who actually lost something are the ones who get something back." Leander understood what she meant. He began making calls. The Mortimer Hargrove Scholarship was announced on a Friday morning 6 weeks after the wedding. That did not happen in a press release, distributed simultaneously to 12 outlets. Full 4-year grants for first-generation Black architecture and urban planning students across Georgia and South Carolina. 5 recipients in the inaugural class selected through a partnership with 3 HBCUs administered through the Hargrove Family Trust. Caldwell had brought the idea to Minerva on a Tuesday evening at the house on Pinehurst Lane, sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where she had wrapped the journal 3 weeks earlier. He had a single page of notes. She read it once, set it down, and looked at her son across the table. "Your father," she said, "would have built this himself eventually." She pushed the paper back across to him. "Let's build it now." The scholarship received 431 applications in 72 hours for 5 positions. The selection committee, which Caldwell chaired, spent 3 weeks reading every one. He read them in the mornings before work and on weekend afternoons, and once late on a Tuesday night, he called Minerva and read her 3 of them over the phone, not asking for anything, just sharing. She listened to all 3 without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Those 3." He said, "I know." She said, "Then you already have your answer." The inaugural class was announced at a small ceremony at the Savannah College of Art and Design on a Saturday morning in late January. The auditorium held 300 people and was full. Minerva sat in the front row in a charcoal gray dress she had bought specifically for this occasion. She had been asked to speak and had declined. "I'm here to watch," she had said. "I've done enough." Caldwell spoke. He talked about Mortimer, about the single truck and 4 men in the first contract in 1988. About a man who built something of enormous consequence while conducting himself as though the consequence were entirely beside the point, as though the building itself were sufficient and the size of what he was building were incidental. He talked about what it meant to be raised by someone who never performed their own worth because they had never doubted it. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out the journal. The room understood what it was seeing before he explained it. The leather wrapping, the thin cord tied twice the specific worn quality of something that had been handled with care over a long period of time. "My mother started writing in this the day I was born," Caldwell said. 33 years ago, there are 114 pages. She sent me many of them over the years. But the last one, he paused briefly, she never sent. I found it when she handed me the journal at Thornfield Estate in September, tucked between the back cover and the leather. She wrote it on the morning of my 33rd birthday, 3 months before the wedding. He opened the journal to the last page. He read it in his mother's voice because that was how she had written it, in the direct address she had used for every entry, speaking to him across whatever distance existed between the moment of writing and the moment of reading. 33 years, I have watched you become exactly what I hoped for and entirely what I didn't expect. Your father built the foundation. You decide what stands on it. Whatever you choose, build it honest. Build it solid. Build it for the people who come after. That's the only kind of building that holds." He closed the journal. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true has been said, in them a different quality of silence than the polite silence of attention. Something more like the silence of recognition, of people absorbing something that confirms what they already knew, but needed to hear, said out loud. Minerva was looking at her son. She was not crying, she was simply present in full, the way she had felt reading those 114 pages at her kitchen table in September. The way she had felt on every morning for 33 years when she sat down at that table and wrote another page to the boy who was now standing at a podium reading the last one back to her. Mortimer had built a trust to protect her from people who would try to use information as a weapon. He had not known the specific mourning. He had known the category of mourning. And he had spent the last years of his life quietly ensuring that when that morning came, Minerva would not be standing in it alone. She had not been. Where they are now. Minerva Hargrove still lives on Pinehurst Lane. She still irons her own clothes. She still drives the 2015 Civic, though Keandra had the cracked passenger side mirror repaired as a Christmas gift without telling her, and Minerva noticed immediately and said nothing. Simply drove to her next board meeting in a car that was otherwise exactly the same as it had always been. She attends one Hargrove and Associates board meeting per quarter. She sits in whatever chair is available. No one assigns her a seat because everyone in that room understands that people who own rooms do not require assigned positions within them. Caldwell Hargrove returned to his architecture firm 3 weeks after September. He is currently designing a community center for the east side of Savannah Pro Bono, his own initiative, the largest project he has undertaken independently. He is not seeing anyone. He says he is not in a hurry. He says he has been learning the difference between choosing a person and choosing an idea of a person, and that the learning takes longer than he expected, but is worth the time. Leander Tillman was named one of Georgia's most influential business leaders by Atlanta Magazine in December. When the profile asked him about the afternoon at Thornfield Estate, he said, "I've walked into rooms where people underestimated me my entire career." That Saturday was not unusual. What was unusual was the expression on certain people's faces when they discovered what they had been standing on. Keandra Pittman was hired by a national civil rights media organization in November. Her first published piece was about the architecture of social silence, the specific practice collective decision that rooms full of people make when they choose not to intervene. It was read 800,000 times in its first week. Pastor Aldridge Odom quoted from it in a sermon without attribution, and his congregation understood exactly what he was referencing. Cordelia Northcott left Savannah quietly. She has made no public statement. People who know her say she is doing the private and difficult work of understanding the difference between what she was taught to value and what actually has value. That work takes as long as it takes. It is not the kind of work that produces announcements. Henrietta Northcott issued no apology. Some people never do. The absence of an apology is itself a kind of statement, and the world has learned to read it. Minerva's only public comment appeared in a Savannah Morning News profile published the following January. The journalist asked her what she wanted people to take from everything that had happened. Minerva thought about it for a moment the way she thought before she said something she had considered carefully. Mortimer built everything he built so that our son would never have to prove his worth to anyone, she said. This past fall, I watched that work hold. She did not say anything else on the subject. She went home, made coffee, sat on the front porch of the house on Pinehurst Lane, and watched her street come alive in the early morning. The way she watched it most mornings, the neighbors leaving for work, the light changing on the oak trees, the particular quality of a Savannah morning that she had never entirely gotten used to because she had always been too grateful for it to let it become ordinary. It was the same street Mortimer had stood on 35 years ago in a parking lot and promised would one day know their name. It did now. Real worth does not announce itself. It does not arrive in the right car or wear the right dress or require a room's approval to know what it is. Minerva Hargrove walked into that estate carrying 33 years of love in a leather journal and left with every single one of them intact. The people who tried to diminish her did not take one thing from her. They only revealed themselves. The measure of a room is not how it treats the people it recognizes. It is how it treats the ones it doesn't yet.